The grand piano sat untouched in the corner of the music room, a layer of dust covering its polished black surface. Elena Vasquez ran her cleaning cloth over it gently, almost reverently. She hummed softly as she worked, a melody from her childhood that her grandmother had taught her. The Harrington mansion was quiet at this hour. Mr. Harrington was at work, as usual, and the household staff went about their duties with practiced efficiency. Elena had been working as a live-in maid for just 3 weeks, but she'd quickly learned the rhythms of the enormous house. She lifted the piano's lid and sighed at the sight of the pristine keys. Such a beautiful instrument left to gather dust. In her small apartment back home, she'd had an old upright piano that had been her most treasured possession. She'd had to sell it to pay for her journey to America. Elena was 32. With dark hair she kept neatly tied back and hands that, despite the housework, still moved with the grace of a musician. She held a master's degree in music education from the university in her homeland, but here, those credentials meant nothing without the right paperwork and connections. So she cleaned houses and sent money home to her family, keeping her dreams tucked away like precious keepsakes. She pressed one key gently, letting a single clear note ring through the empty room. "Hello? Is someone there?" Elena jumped and turned quickly. Standing in the doorway was Michael Harrington, the 12-year-old son of her employer. The boy's hand rested lightly on the doorframe, his unseeing eyes directed toward the sound. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you," Elena said quickly, worried about overstepping boundaries. "I was just cleaning the piano." Michael tilted his head. He was small for his age, with a thin face and light brown hair that fell across his forehead. He'd been blind since birth, Elena had been told during her orientation. "That was an F sharp," he said. "Middle octave." Elena looked at the key she'd pressed, surprised. "Yes, it was." "How did you know?" A shy smile spread across Michael's face. "I can tell by the sound. Dad says I have good ears to make up for my eyes." "That's impressive," Elena said, genuinely amazed. "Do you play?" The boy's face fell. "No, Dad says there's no point. I need to focus on practical subjects. Math, science, business. Things I can use to be successful someday." He stepped carefully into the room, one hand extended slightly. "But I listen to music all the time. Classical mostly. Sometimes jazz." Elena watched as he navigated toward the sound of her voice with the confidence of someone who had memorized every inch of his home. When he reached the piano, his fingers found the edge and moved along it until they reached the keys. "May I?" he asked. "Of course," Elena said, stepping aside. Michael sat on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. Hesitantly, he began to press them one by one, listening intently to each note. Then, to Elena's surprise, he began to pick out a simple melody with his right hand, the opening notes of Beethoven's Für Elise. "Who taught you that?" she asked. "Nobody. I heard it on one of my records and figured it out." He hit a wrong note and frowned. "I can't get it exactly right, though." Elena watched his frustration grow as he tried again and again to play the sequence correctly. Without thinking, she sat beside him on the bench. "Your hand position is making it difficult," she said gently. "May I show you?" When he nodded, she carefully adjusted his wrist and fingers. "Like this. Keep your wrist relaxed and your fingers curved like you're holding an orange." Michael tried again, and this time the notes flowed more smoothly. His face lit up with a smile that transformed him. "That's better." "How did you know that?" Elena hesitated. She hadn't meant to reveal her background, but the boy's enthusiasm was infectious. "I used to teach piano, back in my country." "Really? Could you?" He stopped, his excitement fading. "Never mind. Dad wouldn't approve." "What wouldn't he approve of?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Piano lessons. He says music is fine for enjoyment, but not for study. Not for me, anyway." He ran his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "He wants me to be just like him someday." Elena thought of the stern, distant man who was her employer. Richard Harrington was a self-made millionaire who ran his household like one of his companies, efficiently, with clear expectations and little room for frivolity. In the few interactions she'd had with him, he'd been polite but cold. "What do you want to be?" she asked softly. Michael shrugged. "I don't know. I've never really thought about it. Dad says with my condition, I need to be twice as smart and work twice as hard as everyone else." Something in Elena's heart ached for this boy, so bright and clearly talented but boxed in by others' expectations. "Well," she said, making a decision that she hoped wouldn't cost her this job. What if I showed you a little more? Just for today? Your father doesn't need to know. His face brightened instantly. Really, you would do that? Of course. But we should be quick. I still have the library to clean. For the next 20 minutes, Elena showed Michael the proper hand positions and helped him learn the first few measures of Für-Elise correctly. The boy was a natural with an ear for pitch that many of her former students had lacked. He absorbed her instructions eagerly, trying again and again until he got each section right. That's perfect, Elena said as he played the opening sequence flawlessly. You're a fast learner. It's easier when someone shows me what to do, he said, instead of just trying to copy what I hear. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, startling them both. I should go, Elena said, standing up. Mrs. Phillips will be wondering where I am. Michael's face fell, but he nodded. Thank you for showing me. Will you? He hesitated. Will you come back tomorrow? Elena knew she should say no. She was here to clean, not to teach music. If Mr. Harrington found out, he would certainly fire her. But looking at Michael's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Yes, she said. Same time tomorrow. But this has to be our secret, okay? He nodded solemnly. I promise. Over the next few weeks, their secret lessons became a cherished ritual. Elena would finish cleaning the music room quickly, then spend 20 or 30 minutes teaching Michael. The boy soaked up knowledge like a sponge, his natural talent blooming under her guidance. She taught him scales and chords, how to read sheet music by ear as she played it for him, and how to express emotion through his playing. With each lesson, she saw him grow more confident, not just at the piano but in himself. One day, while showing him how to play a simple Chopin nocturne, Elena mentioned her dream of creating Braille sheet music for him. You can do that? Michael asked, amazed. With the right materials, yes. I studied adaptive music education as part of my degree. Music is for everyone, not just people who can see standard notation. That would be amazing, he whispered. To be able to read music myself, without needing someone to play it for me first. Elena made a mental note to look into resources for Braille music transcription on her next day off. It would be expensive, but seeing the joy on Michael's face would make it worthwhile. As they continued their lessons, Elena began to notice subtle changes in Michael. He walked with more confidence, spoke more freely, and smiled more often. Music was giving him something mathematics and science never had, a voice of his own. One afternoon, as Michael mastered a particularly difficult passage, he turned to where he knew Elena was sitting and said, I wish Dad could hear me play. Maybe then he'd understand. Elena thought about Richard Harrington, who worked 16-hour days and seemed to view his son more as a project than a child. Maybe someday, she said carefully, when the time is right. His birthday is next month, Michael said thoughtfully. What if I learned a special piece to play for him? Something impressive. Elena hesitated. Such a revelation could cost her job, but seeing the hope in Michael's face, she couldn't bring herself to discourage him. What piece were you thinking of? Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement. It's Dad's favorite classical piece. I've heard him play it on the stereo when he thinks I'm asleep. It was an ambitious choice for a beginner, but not impossible. We'll need to practice every day, she said, and I'll need to find a way to transcribe it into Braille for you. I can do it, Michael said with determination. I want to show him that I can be good at something he values. That music isn't just a waste of time. As Elena packed up her cleaning supplies that day, she felt both proud and worried. She was helping Michael find his voice, but at what cost? Would his father appreciate the gift his son wanted to give? Or would he only see rules being broken and boundaries overstepped? Only time would tell. But for now, the secret lessons would continue. A small act of rebellion in a house ruled by practicality and rigid expectations. A hidden talent waiting for its moment to shine. Fall turned to winter, and the secret piano lessons continued. Elena spent her one day off each week searching for resources on Braille music notation at the public library. She'd found several books that explained the system, but creating the actual sheets would take time and materials she couldn't easily afford. Still, she managed to transcribe simple exercises for Michael, painstakingly creating them by hand with a special stylus and slate she'd ordered with nearly a week's wages. The look on his face when she first placed the dotted pages in his hands had been worth every penny. I can read it, he'd whispered, his fingers dancing across the page. I can actually read music. Now, on a cold January afternoon, Elena sat beside Michael at the piano as he practiced the opening measures of the Moonlight Sonata. His fingers moved slowly but confidently across the keys, the haunting melody filling the music room. "That's it," Elena encouraged as he reached the end of the section they'd been working on. "You've got the notes perfect. Now let's work on the feeling." "The feeling?" Michael asked, his brow furrowing. "Music isn't just about playing the right notes in the right order," Elena explained. "It's about expressing emotion. Beethoven wrote this when he was falling in love with a student he was teaching. It's full of longing and tenderness." "How do I play longing?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. Elena thought for a moment. "Think about something you want very much but can't have. Something that makes your heart ache a little. Then let that feeling flow through your fingers into the keys." Michael was quiet for a moment, his unseeing eyes directed toward the window where winter sunlight streamed in. "I know what that feels like," he said softly. When he began to play again, the difference was remarkable. The notes were the same, but they carried a weight and depth that hadn't been there before. Elena felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "That's it," she whispered when he finished. "That's exactly it." A small, proud smile spread across Michael's face. "I was thinking about going to a real school," he admitted. "With other kids. Dad always says I'm better off with private tutors, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like." Elena's heart ached for him. In the months she'd worked at the Harrington mansion, she'd never seen Michael with friends his own age. His life consisted of lessons with stern tutors, occasional outings with his father to business functions, and long hours alone in his room with his audiobooks and records. "You'd do well in a school," she said. "You're smart and kind. You'd make friends easily." "Do you really think so?" The hope in his voice was almost painful to hear. "I know so. And who knows? Maybe after your father hears you play, he'll see you're capable of more than he realized." Their lessons had taken on new meaning since Michael had decided to play for his father's birthday. It was no longer just about learning music for its own sake, but about proving something to his father and perhaps to himself. As the weeks passed, Elena found herself growing more and more attached to the quiet, thoughtful boy. In many ways, he reminded her of her younger brother back home, with his quick mind and gentle spirit. Teaching him had rekindled her own love for music, which had been dormant since she'd left her country. "Tell me about where you grew up," Michael asked one day as they took a break from practice. Elena leaned against the piano, remembering. "It's a small town in the mountains, very green with flowers everywhere in spring. My family's house has a tiny garden where my mother grows vegetables and herbs. From the front step you can see all the way to the valley below." "It sounds beautiful," Michael said wistfully. "It is, but there aren't many opportunities there. That's why I came here. Do you miss it?" Elena thought of her family gathered around the dinner table, of the church bells on Sunday mornings, of the smell of her mother's cooking. "Every day," she admitted. "But I'm making a new life here. I'm glad you came," Michael said simply. "Otherwise, who would have taught me to play?" The genuine gratitude in his voice warmed something inside her. "I'm glad too." One afternoon, as their lesson was ending, Michael asked a question that caught Elena off guard. "What does my dad look like?" "When he smiles, I mean." Elena considered Richard Harrington, a man she rarely saw and had spoken to directly only a handful of times. He was tall, with the same light brown hair as his son, though his was streaked with gray at the temples. His face was handsome in a stern way, with deep lines between his brows from frowning. "I don't know if I've ever seen him really smile," she said honestly. "He used to, before Mom died," Michael said quietly. "I don't remember seeing it, of course, but I remember hearing it in his voice." He laughed more then, too. Elena hadn't known about Michael's mother. No one had mentioned her during Elena's brief orientation to the household. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "She got sick when I was 4. Cancer. Dad changed after that. He became harder, more worried about everything, especially me." Michael's fingers moved absently across the piano keys, not pressing hard enough to make sound. "I think that's why he's so strict. He's afraid of losing me too." The insight was remarkably mature for a 12-year-old. Elena looked at Michael with new understanding. His father's cold exterior and rigid rules suddenly made more sense. They were a shield against further pain, a desperate attempt to control what could not be controlled. "Maybe your music will help him remember how to smile," she suggested. Michael brightened at the thought. "Maybe it will. As Richard's birthday approached, they increased their practice sessions. Michael could now play the entire first movement of the Moonlight Sonata from memory, his fingers finding the keys unerringly. Elena had helped him perfect his technique, but the emotion in his playing came entirely from within. The day before the birthday dinner, Elena found Michael sitting at the piano, not playing but simply running his fingers lightly over the keys. "Nervous?" she asked, sitting beside him. "What if he hates it?" Michael's voice was small. "What if he gets angry that I've been doing this instead of my extra math studies?" Elena had considered this possibility many times. Richard Harrington was not a man who liked surprises or challenges to his authority. The revelation that his son had been taking secret piano lessons might well anger him. But seeing how much Michael had blossomed over these months, his increased confidence, his joy in creating music, Elena couldn't bring herself to regret their lessons, whatever the consequences. "Your father loves you," she said, choosing her words carefully. "He might be surprised, even upset at first. But when he hears how beautifully you play, I think he'll understand why this matters to you." Michael nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Will you be there? At the dinner tomorrow night?" Elena shook her head. "No, that's just for family and your father's business associates. But I'll help you prepare everything. We'll make sure the piano is perfectly tuned and positioned, so you can reach it easily from your seat at the table." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning the surprise. The dinner would be in the formal dining room, which opened onto the music room through large double doors. After the main course, Michael would excuse himself, move to the piano, and begin to play. Elena would ensure the doors were open at exactly the right moment. As they finished their planning, Michael reached out and found Elena's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for helping with tomorrow, but for everything. For teaching me. For believing I could do this." Elena squeezed his hand, fighting a sudden tightness in her throat. "You're the one doing all the work. I'm just showing you the way. Still, it means a lot to me." He hesitated, then added, "You're the only one who sees me as just Michael. Not poor blind Michael or Richard Harrington's unfortunate son. Just me." "That's who you are," Elena said softly. "Just Michael. And that's more than enough." Later that night, as Elena folded laundry in her small room off the kitchen, she found herself worrying about the next day. What if things went wrong? What if Richard Harrington was furious about the secret lessons? Would he fire her? And what would that mean for Michael? She pushed these thoughts aside. Whatever happened, she knew she had done something worthwhile in teaching Michael. She had helped him find his voice, his passion. No matter what came next, that was something no one could take away from him. As she prepared for bed, Elena found herself humming the Moonlight Sonata, her hands moving in the air as if playing an invisible piano. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight, she would hold on to hope. Hope that music could heal old wounds. Hope that a father could learn to see his son in a new light. Hope that a simple birthday gift could become something more. A bridge between two hearts that had grown too far apart. The morning of Richard Harrington's birthday dawned bright and clear. The mansion hummed with activity as the staff prepared for the evening's dinner party. In the kitchen, the chef worked on an elaborate menu, while housekeepers polished silver and arranged fresh flowers in crystal vases. Elena moved through the chaos with purpose, completing her usual cleaning duties while keeping an eye on the time. She had arranged to meet Michael in the music room at noon for one final practice before the evening's performance. When she arrived, he was already sitting at the piano, his fingers dancing over a piece she hadn't taught him. "That's beautiful," she said, closing the door behind her. "What is it?" Michael smiled, not stopping his playing. "Something I made up. Do you like it?" Elena listened, amazed. The melody was simple but haunting, with unexpected chord progressions that gave it depth and emotion. "You composed this yourself?" she asked, sitting beside him on the bench. He nodded, finishing with a delicate flourish. "I've been working on it for a few weeks, when I couldn't sleep." "It's wonderful," Elena said honestly. "You have a gift not just for playing, but for creating music." Michael ducked his head, clearly pleased by the praise. "I thought maybe after tonight, if Dad is okay with the Beethoven, maybe I could play this for him too someday." "I think he'd love it," Elena said, though she wasn't entirely sure. In all her months working in the Harrington household, she had never seen Richard show much interest in creative pursuits. But perhaps his son's talent would surprise him, open him to new possibilities. They spent the next hour going through the Moonlight Sonata, one last time. Michael played it perfectly, every note infused with feeling. "Remember," Elena said as they finished, "the most important thing is to play from your heart. That's what makes music special, when you put your feelings into it." "What if my hands shake?" Michael asked, a tremor of nervousness in his voice. "What if I forget the notes?" Elena squeezed his shoulder gently. "Your hands know what to do. Trust them. And if you forget something, just keep going. The music will carry you." They went over the logistics again. After the main course, Michael would excuse himself to use the bathroom. Instead of turning right toward the hall, he would turn left into the music room. Elena would be waiting to help him to the piano. Then she would open the double doors between the dining room and music room just as he began to play. "It's going to be perfect," Elena assured him. "You're going to amaze everyone." As they were finishing their planning, the door to the music room suddenly opened. Both Elena and Michael froze, but it wasn't Richard who entered. It was Mrs. Phillips, the head housekeeper, a thin woman with graying hair and perpetually pursed lips. "There you are." "Elena," she said briskly, "I've been looking everywhere for you. The florist has arrived with the centerpieces, and I need you to help arrange them." If Mrs. Phillips thought it strange to find Elena and Michael together at the piano, she gave no sign of it. "Of course," Elena said, standing quickly. "I'll be right there." After Mrs. Phillips left, Elena turned to Michael. "I have to go, but I'll see you tonight, okay? Everything's going to be fine." Michael nodded, his hands resting lightly on the piano keys. "Thank you, Elena, for everything." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Elena barely had time to think as she rushed from task to task, helping with the final preparations for the dinner party. By the time the first guests began to arrive at 7 o'clock, every surface in the mansion gleamed, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers and delicious food. Elena watched from the kitchen as the guests, mostly business associates of Richard's, along with a few family friends, were ushered into the formal dining room. Michael sat at his father's right hand, dressed in a suit that made him look older than his 12 years. Richard Harrington himself looked imposing in a dark suit, his face set in its usual serious expression as he greeted his guests. Elena had never seen him smile, not really, and she wondered if Michael's surprise would change that. As the kitchen staff began serving the main course, Elena slipped away to the music room. Everything was ready. The piano lid raised, the bench positioned perfectly, the sheet music with its braille notation set aside, though Michael wouldn't need it. Through the closed double doors, she could hear the murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware against china from the dining room. She checked her watch. 20 minutes until the dessert course. That was when Michael would make his move. Elena paced nervously, straightening the already straight sheet music, adjusting the bench that didn't need adjusting. So much was riding on this moment. Not just her job, though she had no illusions about what Richard Harrington might do when he discovered she'd been teaching his son piano against his wishes, but Michael's happiness. The boy had blossomed over these months of lessons, gaining confidence and joy that extended beyond his music. To have his father reject this part of him would be crushing. Elena was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed the sound of the dining room door opening and closing, followed by quiet footsteps in the hall. But it wasn't time yet. Dessert hadn't been served. Had something gone wrong? The door to the music room opened, and Elena turned, expecting to see Michael. Instead, Richard Harrington himself stood in the doorway. "Mr. Harrington," she gasped, her heart pounding. "Ms. Vasquez," he said coolly. "What are you doing in here?" Before Elena could think of a response, they both heard it. The sound of approaching footsteps, accompanied by the tap-tap of a cane against hardwood. Richard turned, confusion crossing his face as Michael appeared in the doorway. "Dad?" Michael said, his head tilted slightly. "What are you doing here?" Now it was Richard's turn to look startled. "I saw Ms. Vasquez leave the dining room and became curious. The better question is, what are you doing here? You said you were going to the restroom." Michael's face paled slightly, but he straightened his shoulders. I was going to surprise you." "For your birthday? Surprise me?" Richard looked between his son and Elena, his brow furrowing. "What's going on here?" Elena stepped forward. She had to take responsibility, had to protect Michael from his father's anger. "It's my fault, Mr. Harrington," she said. "I've been teaching Michael to play the piano. He wanted to surprise you with a piece for your birthday." Richard's face darkened. You've been what? Teaching me piano, Michael said, his voice stronger now. For months. And I'm good, Dad, really good. Elena says I have a natural talent for it. Elena, Richard repeated, his voice sharp. You're on a first-name basis with the staff now? Michael flinched but held his ground. She's my teacher. She's a maid, Richard snapped. Hired to clean, not to undermine my authority or distract you from your studies. Elena felt a flash of anger at his dismissive tone, but she kept her voice calm. Your son has a remarkable gift, Mr. Harrington. I simply helped him discover it. Richard turned to her, his eyes cold. You overstepped your boundaries, Ms. Vasquez. Significantly. Dad, please, Michael said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. Just listen. Let me play for you. Then you'll understand. Understand what? Richard asked. That you've been deceiving me? That you've been wasting time that should have been spent on your schoolwork? It wasn't a waste, Michael insisted. Music has rules and patterns, just like math. It's helped me think differently, feel differently. He took a step toward the piano. Just let me show you. For a moment, it seemed Richard might relent. His expression softened slightly as he looked at his son's earnest face. But then his gaze fell on Elena again and his jaw hardened. No, he said firmly. Ms. Vasquez has taken advantage of her position in this household and your vulnerability. This ends now. He turned to Elena. You're fired. Pack your things and be out by morning. Elena had expected this, had prepared herself for it, but the finality of the words still hit her like a physical blow. Mr. Harrington, please. Dad, no! Michael cried, his face crumpling. You can't fire her. It was my idea to learn piano. I asked her to teach me. You're a child, Michael, Richard said, his voice softening slightly when he addressed his son. She should have known better. I'm not just a child, Michael said, anger replacing his initial shock. I'm a person with my own thoughts and feelings. And I want to play piano. It makes me happy. Don't you care about that? Richard looked taken aback by his son's outburst. In all the months Elena had worked in the Harrington household, she had never heard Michael raise his voice to his father. Of course I care about your happiness, Richard said stiffly, but I also care about your future. Piano playing won't help you succeed in the real world. What if I don't want your version of success? Michael's hands were clenched at his sides now, his whole body tense. What if I want something different? The two stood in silence, the gulf between them seeming wider than ever. Elena felt like an intruder witnessing something deeply private, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Michael alone in this moment. Finally, Richard sighed. We'll discuss this later. Right now I have guests waiting. He turned to Elena, his expression cold once more. My decision stands, Ms. Vasquez. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay. I expect you gone by morning. Without waiting for a response, he turned to leave. Come, Michael. People will be wondering where we are. Instead of following his father, Michael took a step toward Elena. I'm not coming, he said, his voice shaking but determined. Not until you listen to me play. Richard stopped in the doorway, his back stiff. This isn't the time for childish rebellion. It's not rebellion, Michael said quietly. It's just me trying to show you who I am. For a long moment, Richard stood frozen. Then, without another word, he walked out, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stood motionless, his unseeing eyes fixed on the door his father had just exited through. I'm so sorry, Elena whispered, her heart breaking for the boy. Michael shook his head slowly. Not your fault. His voice was hollow. He never really sees me. Never really listens. In a gesture that surprised her, Michael felt his way to the piano bench and sat down. His fingers found the keys and he began to play. Not the Beethoven they had practiced so carefully, but the original composition he had been working on when she entered the room earlier. The melody filled the room, sadder now, heavy with unspoken words and unexpressed emotions. Elena stood quietly, listening as Michael poured his heart into the music, saying with his fingers what he couldn't say with words. When he finished, the final notes hanging in the air between them, he turned his face toward her. What do I do now? He asked, sounding suddenly very young. Elena moved to sit beside him on the bench. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever happens, don't stop playing. Don't let this moment take music away from you. Will I see you again? His voice cracked slightly on the question. Elena hesitated. The proper answer would be no. She would pack her things, leave the Harrington mansion and find another job. Their paths would never cross again. But looking at Michael's face, at the pain and loss written there, she couldn't bring herself to say that. "I'll find a way," she promised softly. "This isn't goodbye forever." As she walked back to her room to begin packing, Elena's mind raced with thoughts of what would come next. She had a little money saved, enough for a deposit on a small apartment perhaps. She could find another housekeeping job, though references might be difficult after being fired. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight her heart ached for a boy whose moment of triumph had turned to ashes, whose attempt to bridge the gap between himself and his father had only widened it instead. Richard Harrington returned to the dining room with a forced smile, apologizing to his guests for the delay. If anyone noticed his slightly shaken demeanor, or the absence of his son, they were too polite to mention it. The dinner continued, conversations flowing around him while his mind remained fixed on what had just happened. In all his years as a father, Michael had never defied him like that. Never raised his voice or refused to follow a direct instruction. The boy had always been obedient, quiet, accepting of the path Richard had laid out for him until tonight. "Is everything all right, Richard?" asked Thomas Wilson, his oldest business partner, seated to his left. "You seem distracted." Richard nodded, taking a sip of wine. "Just thinking about a business matter." But it wasn't business on his mind as the dinner dragged on. It was the look on his son's face when Richard had dismissed his music, dismissed the maid who had been teaching him. There had been something new there, not just hurt, but a kind of determination Richard had never seen before. After the last guest left, close to midnight, Richard stood in the foyer feeling strangely hollow. The house was quiet now, the staff having cleaned up and retired to their quarters. He loosened his tie and headed upstairs, pausing outside Michael's door. Should he knock? Try to talk to him? What would he even say? Before he could decide, he heard it, the soft sound of piano music coming from downstairs. Richard followed the sound back to the music room. The door was partially open, spilling a wedge of light into the darkened hallway. Inside, Michael sat at the piano, playing the same haunting melody Richard had interrupted earlier. Richard stood silently in the doorway, watching his son's fingers move confidently across the keys. In the soft lamplight, Michael's expression was one of complete absorption, his unseeing eyes half closed as he swayed slightly with the music. When had his son learned to play like this? The piece was complex, emotional, nothing like the simple exercises Richard would have expected from a beginner. Michael played with a sensitivity that seemed far beyond his 12 years. As the final notes faded, Richard found himself unable to move, unable to speak. There was a lump in his throat that hadn't been there in years, not since— "I know you're there, Dad," Michael said quietly, his hands resting on the keys. "I can hear you breathing," Richard started. "How did you know it was me?" "Your cologne, and your footsteps. They're heavier than Elena's." Michael turned on the bench, facing roughly toward where his father stood. "Have your guests all gone home?" Richard moved into the room, approaching the piano slowly. "Yes, it's late. You should be in bed." "I couldn't sleep." Michael's fingers traced patterns on the piano keys without pressing them. "I keep thinking about Elena leaving tomorrow." Richard felt a flicker of annoyance at the mention of the maid's name, but it was quickly replaced by uncertainty. Seeing his son play had shaken something loose inside him. "The decision is final, Michael." "Why?" Michael asked simply. "Because she taught me something you didn't approve of? Or because I kept it a secret from you?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Both. She overstepped her role in this household and you went behind my back. I went behind your back because I knew you'd say no." Michael's voice was soft but steady. "You always say no to anything that isn't practical, that won't help me succeed in the real world. But Dad, this is real to me. Music makes me feel whole." The words hit Richard with unexpected force. When was the last time he'd asked his son what made him feel whole? When was the last time he'd thought about anything for Michael beyond academic achievement and practical skills? "That piece you were playing," Richard said, changing the subject slightly. "What was it?" A hint of pride crept into Michael's voice. "I wrote it. Elena helped me with the structure, but the melody and harmonies are mine." "You composed it yourself?" Richard couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Michael nodded. "I hear music all the time in my head. Now I can finally play what I hear." Richard moved closer until he was standing beside the piano. "Play it again," he said, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Michael. Michael's eyebrows rose, but he turned back to the piano without question. As he began to play, Richard watched his son's face, the subtle changes of expression, the small smile when he reached a passage he particularly liked, the furrow of concentration between his brows during the more complex sections. The music itself was beautiful, melancholy yet hopeful, simple yet profound. Richard found himself thinking of his late wife, of how she used to sing to Michael when he was a baby, of how music had filled their home before her illness took her away. When had he decided that music was impractical, unnecessary? When had he started focusing so narrowly on what he thought Michael needed, without considering what might bring him joy? As the final notes faded away, a heavy silence filled the room. Michael waited, his hands resting on the keys, his face turned expectantly toward his father. "That was—" Richard hesitated, unused to giving praise. "That was beautiful, Michael." A smile broke across the boy's face, transforming him. "Really? You liked it?" "Yes." Richard's voice was gruff with emotion. "Your mother would have loved it too." At the mention of his mother, Michael's smile faltered slightly. "I wish I could remember her better." Richard sat down on the bench beside his son, something he hadn't done in years. "She loved music. She used to play the old record player in the living room and dance around with you in her arms, even when you were too little to know what was happening." "You never told me that before," Michael said quietly. "There's a lot I haven't told you." Richard looked at his son's profile, so like his mother's. "I've been so focused on making sure you had the skills to succeed, to be independent despite your blindness. I think I forgot about the things that make life worth living." Michael's hand found his father's on the bench between them. "Like music?" "Like music," Richard agreed. "Like joy." They sat in silence for a moment, the word joy hanging in the air between them. When was the last time Richard had thought about joy? His son's or his own? He had been so consumed with preparing Michael for a challenging world, he'd forgotten to help him find happiness in it. "Dad," Michael said finally, "please don't make Elena leave. She's been so good to me. Not just with the piano. She believes in me, really sees me, and she needs this job." Richard felt his resolve wavering. The maid had indeed overstepped, but the results of her actions were sitting right beside him. A son who had discovered a passion, a talent, a voice of his own. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But for now it's late. We both need some sleep." Michael nodded, standing from the piano bench. As they walked upstairs together, Richard found himself noticing things he had missed before. The confident way Michael navigated the house, the straight set of his shoulders, the quiet determination in his expression. His son had grown up somehow when he wasn't looking. That night, Richard slept poorly. His dreams were filled with music, with his wife's laughter, with the image of his son's face transformed by joy as he played the piano. In the morning, he rose early and went to his study. There, he did something he'd been avoiding for years. He began researching blindness not as a disability to be overcome, but as a different way of experiencing the world. He found articles about blind musicians, about the connection between music and spatial reasoning, about schools and programs that used music to help visually impaired children develop confidence and creativity. He read accounts written by blind adults about what had helped them most growing up, and rigid academic focus was rarely mentioned. Instead, they spoke of having their abilities recognized, of being allowed to pursue their passions, of being seen as whole people rather than problems to be solved. One article in particular caught his attention, a study showing that musical training often helped blind individuals develop enhanced spatial reasoning and confidence. The same skills Richard had been trying to foster through endless math and science lessons might actually be better developed through the very thing he had dismissed as impractical. As the morning light strengthened outside his window, Richard finally understood what the maid, Elena, had somehow known instinctively. His son needed music not as a frivolous pastime, but as a genuine path to growth. And what about Elena herself? Richard had done a thorough background check on all his staff, as was his practice. He recalled now the details he had glossed over in her file: the music education degree from her home country, her work with children before coming to America. She wasn't just a maid who happened to play piano. She was a trained music teacher who had been working as a maid because her credentials weren't recognized here. Richard rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the weight of his misjudgment. He had been so quick to dismiss her, to see her actions as an overreach rather than what they truly were, a gift to his son. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at his study door. "Come in," he called. Mrs. Phillips, the head housekeeper, entered with a concerned expression. "Mr. Harrington, Ms. Vasquez is packed and ready to leave. She's asking if she might say goodbye to Michael before she goes." Richard checked his watch. It was barely 7 in the morning. Michael is still asleep. "She's left something for him," Mrs. Phillips continued. "Some music sheets with raised dots on them. She asked if you would give them to him. Braille sheet music, of course." Elena had thought of everything, even how to help Michael continue playing without her guidance. Richard stood up, making a sudden decision. "Tell Ms. Vasquez not to leave. I need to speak with her." Mrs. Phillips looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, sir. She's waiting in the kitchen." When Mrs. Phillips had gone, Richard sat back down at his desk, gathering his thoughts. He was not a man who easily admitted mistakes or changed his mind once a decision had been made. But seeing his son play last night, reading about the benefits of music for blind children, recognizing Elena's qualifications, it all pointed to one conclusion. He had been wrong. The realization was uncomfortable but clear. Now the question was what to do about it. How could he give his son what he needed without losing his authority as a parent? How could he acknowledge Elena's value without undermining his position as employer? As he pondered these questions, he heard the piano again, distant but clear. Michael was up, drawn once more to the music room, to the instrument that had become his voice. Richard listened, feeling something shift inside him. Perhaps the answer was simpler than he was making it. Perhaps it was time to focus less on authority and position, and more on what truly mattered, his son's happiness and growth. With that thought, Richard Harrington did something he had not done in a very long time. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the stern lines of his face. Then he stood up and went to find Elena Vasquez. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her small suitcase beside her. She had packed everything she owned into that single case in a worn backpack, clothes, a few books, and the teaching material she had used with Michael. Mrs. Phillips had brought her a cup of tea, which now sat untouched, growing cold. She hadn't slept much. After packing, she had spent hours creating one final gift for Michael, Braille transcriptions of his favorite pieces, including the composition he had written himself. It wasn't much, but she hoped it would help him continue playing after she was gone. The hardest part wasn't losing the job. She could find another position, though perhaps not one that paid as well. The hardest part was leaving Michael without saying a proper goodbye, without seeing the end of the journey they had started together. She checked her watch. The bus to the city left in an hour. She should go, but something held her there, waiting. Perhaps it was the message Mrs. Phillips had delivered, that Mr. Harrington wanted to speak with her. What more could he possibly have to say? The dismissal had been clear, the reasons given. Elena couldn't imagine what this final conversation might achieve, except perhaps to make her departure even more painful. She heard footsteps approaching and steeled herself. Richard Harrington entered the kitchen, looking different than he had the night before. His suit was gone, replaced by casual pants and a sweater. He looked tired, as if he too had spent a restless night. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Thank you for waiting." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had promised herself she wouldn't beg for her job back, wouldn't apologize for teaching Michael. She had done nothing wrong except perhaps keeping a secret that should have been shared. Richard pulled out a chair across from her and sat down, an unexpectedly informal gesture from a man who typically maintained his distance from the staff. "I've been doing some research this morning," he began, running a hand through his hair, "about music education for visually impaired children." This was not what Elena had expected. She sat up straighter, waiting. "It seems," Richard continued, "that there are significant benefits: enhanced spatial reasoning, improved coordination, greater confidence and self-expression." He looked directly at her, All things I've been trying to foster in Michael through more conventional means. Music does all of those things, Elena said quietly. And more. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. Richard's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. I also reviewed your employment file. You have a master's degree in music education. From my home country, yes. It's not recognized here. With a specialization in adaptive teaching methods for children with disabilities. Elena nodded, surprised he had paid attention to that detail. That's right. Richard was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. Ms. Vasquez, Elena, I believe I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and transformative. In that moment, Elena saw not the stern, unyielding employer, but a father struggling to find his way. I was hasty in my judgment last night, Richard continued. I reacted from a place of anger. Anger that you had gone behind my back, that Michael had kept secrets from me. But I failed to see the bigger picture. Elena felt a flutter of hope, but she kept her expression neutral. Which is, that my son has a gift. A gift you recognized and nurtured when I was too blind. He gave a humorless laugh at his choice of words. Too blind to see it. I heard him play last night after everyone had gone. His own composition. He's very talented, Elena said softly. It comes naturally to him. Yes, and you saw that where I didn't. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. I've spent years trying to prepare Michael for a world that isn't designed for him. I've pushed academics, practical skills, independence. But I've neglected the things that bring him joy, that make him feel connected to the world rather than apart from it. Elena thought of Michael at the piano, his face transformed by the music flowing through him. Joy is important, she said. We all need a voice, a way to express who we are. Michael has found his voice through music. Richard's own voice grew rough with emotion. Through you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of understanding between them. Finally, Richard straightened, his expression becoming more businesslike, though not unkind. I have a proposition for you. Ms. Vasquez, not your old job back, something different entirely. Elena's heart beat faster. I'm listening. I've been thinking about this all night, Richard said. About what Michael needs, about your qualifications, about the resources I have available. He took a breath. I want to fund a music school. A school specifically designed for visually impaired children with you as the director. Elena stared at him, sure she had misheard. A music school? Richard nodded. There's nothing like it in this city. I've already confirmed that. With your expertise in adaptive teaching methods and my financial resources, we could create something truly special. A place where children like Michael could learn to play, to compose, to find their voices. Elena struggled to find words. That's an incredible idea. But it would take time, planning. I have a building, Richard said. A small property downtown that's currently sitting empty. It would need renovation, of course, to be fully accessible, and we'd need to acquire instruments, hire additional teachers eventually. But we could start small with just a few students. Elena's mind raced with possibilities. A real school, where she could use her training, her passion, a place where Michael could learn alongside others, make friends, develop his talent. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? Richard's expression softened. For my son, for the joy I saw on his face last night, and, he added more quietly, for my wife. She always said music was essential, not extra. I think she would approve. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. What about Michael? Have you discussed this with him? Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first to see if this is something you'd be interested in pursuing. Interested? Elena couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. Mr. Harrington, this would be a dream come true. Not just for me, but for so many children who need this opportunity. For the first time since she had known him, Richard Harrington smiled, a real smile that transformed his stern features and reached his eyes. Good, he said simply. Then let's tell Michael together. They found him in the music room, seated at the piano but not playing, his fingers tracing the keys as if memorizing their shape and position. Michael, Richard said from the doorway, I have someone here who would like to speak with you. Michael's head turned toward his father's voice, confusion evident on his face. Dad? Hello, Michael, Elena said softly. The boy's expression transformed instantly, lighting up with joy and disbelief. Elena, you're still here? I thought, Dad said. Plans have changed, Richard said, moving into the room with Elena beside him. Significantly. Over the next half hour, they explained the idea to Michael, the school, Elena's new role, the opportunities it would create. As understanding dawned, Michael's face glowed with excitement. So Elena won't be leaving, and I can keep taking lessons? And there will be other kids like me? Yes to all of that, Richard said, his voice warmer than Elena had ever heard it. And there's something else. I'd like you to play at the opening ceremony. Your own composition. Michael's mouth fell open. Really, you mean it? I mean it. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I want everyone to hear what you can do. The next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The downtown building was renovated with careful attention to accessibility, guide rails along the walls, braille signage, acoustic treatments to optimize sound. Richard spared no expense, consulting with experts in universal design to create a space that was welcoming and navigable for students with varying degrees of visual impairment. Elena worked closely with the architects and designers, drawing on her education and experience to create teaching spaces that would serve their unique purpose. 5 grand pianos were installed, along with a variety of other instruments: guitars, violins, drums, even a small organ. Word spread quickly within the community of families with visually impaired children. Even before the official opening, they had 10 students enrolled for the first term, with more on a waiting list. Through it all, Michael continued his lessons with Elena, now held in a proper studio rather than a dusty music room. His talent flourished, his confidence grew, and perhaps most importantly, the relationship between father and son deepened as Richard learned to see his child through new eyes. On the day of the grand opening, a crowd gathered in the main performance hall of what was now called the Harmony Center for Music Education. Families with children, community leaders, music educators, and local press filled the seats. Richard stood at the podium, looking out at the audience with a mixture of pride and humility. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today to celebrate the opening of this school, a dream that began in an unlikely place with an unlikely teacher. He glanced at Elena, who sat in the front row. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what my son needed. I thought I knew what success looked like, what his future should hold. I was wrong. A murmur went through the crowd at this frank admission from a man known for his unwavering confidence. My son taught me, through his music, that there are many paths to success, many ways to navigate this world. And now I'd like you to hear what he has to say, or rather what he has to play. Richard stepped aside and Michael walked confidently to the grand piano at the center of the stage. He no longer used a cane inside the building. He had helped design it and knew every inch by heart. As Michael began to play, Elena felt tears well up in her eyes. The piece had evolved since those early days in the Harrington mansion. It was richer now, more complex, yet still carried that same haunting beauty that had first caught her attention. She glanced at Richard, standing at the side of the stage, watching his son with undisguised pride. How far they had all come in these months. From a dusty, unused piano to this magnificent school, from secret lessons to public celebration, from misunderstanding to partnership. When Michael finished playing, the audience erupted in applause. He stood smiling broadly and took a bow. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke. I'd like to thank 2 people who made this possible, he said, his voice clear and confident. My father, who learned to listen not just with his ears but with his heart. And Elena, who taught me that music isn't just something you play, it's something you feel, something you live. As applause filled the hall once more, Elena looked around at what they had created together. Not just a school, but a community. A place where children could find their voices, where differences were seen not as limitations but as unique perspectives. From a single secret piano lesson had grown something extraordinary. Something that would touch countless lives in the years to come. And it had all begun because a maid had dared to share her gift, because a boy had longed to create beauty, and because a father had found the courage to change.